In this video, we'll be talking briefly about the rhythm for the Level 1 Rhythm 1 test. We've done a lot of this stuff in class and we'll always be doing rhythm stuff in class, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going over things, but I just want you to get an idea of what kinds of things you'll see on your test. So, as a reminder, I have our rhythm chart written up here. We've got our whole note that we know in common time, or 4/4 time, is worth 4 beats. Our half note is worth 2 beats. Our quarter note worth 1. And our eighth notes each worth a half. As a reminder, usually when there's 2 together, we'll oftentimes beam them, and sometimes when there's just 1 there, we'll see it with a flag. These are the corresponding rests: whole rest, 4 beats; half rest, 2 beats; quarter rest, 1 beat; and eighth rest, half of a beat. Hopefully that stuff is all familiar to you by now, but just in case, that'll be there for our reference. Just like we often do in class, on your test, you'll see some rhythms written out, and it'll be your job to write in the beat numbers. So I just want to make sure that we're clear on the kind of rules that we follow and the conventions that we use when writing in the beats. So as always, if we're in 4/4, well really in any time signature, we're always going to start on beat 1. So our first guy here would be right on 1, and we know that this is a quarter note. Our quarter note gets 1 beat, so it takes up all of beat 1. Which means that our next note, or in this case rest, falls on beat 2. As a reminder, when we have our rests, we typically write those in parentheses. Our next notes are eighth notes, which we know each get half of a beat. Well, we know that since this rest here takes up all of beat 2, the next note's going to fall on beat 3. The question is, what happens next? Well, because it only takes up half of a beat, we can't go to 4 yet. So hopefully you remember from our discussions in class that when we count our eighth notes, we count them 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So in this particular case, after beat 3, we would have the and of beat 3. Now that we've used up all of beat 3, we can go on to 4 finally, where we would place our last note. And because it's a quarter note, it uses up all of beat 4, we now have a complete measure. In the next measure, we start off with a half note. Hopefully you remember from class, typically the conventions for anything larger than a half note, or a half note, or larger I should say, we're gonna write out all of the beats that it encompasses, and we'll link them with a dash. So in this case, we'd have 1, 2. Because our half note is worth 2 beats, it uses up all of beats 1 and 2. Meaning that the next available beat that we can use would be on beat 3. Because these are eighth notes, this only uses up the first half of beat 3. So our next beat would be the end of 3. Now we have one of our eighth rests. We've used up all of beat 3, so we can go ahead and start on beat 4, but we're only going to be using up the first half of beat 4. So our last note here is on the end of 4. Finally, we get to our whole note, and again, our convention is if it's a half note or larger, we write in all the beats. So technically speaking, you would put 1, 2, 3, 4. That said, depending on how much space you get on certain things, sometimes it's just easier to fit 1 through 4. However, just a reminder, the reason that we write 1, 2, 3, 4 is that if we were to be speaking our counts when we're going through music to make sure that we're getting our rhythms correct, one of the common things that happens with long notes is we shortchange them. So by making sure that we say every beat, we make sure that we give that note its full value. So that's part of what you'll see on your test. You'll also see some ties on your test. So just as a reminder, the ties are essentially an addition sign, right? We're adding the value of the 2 beats together. So if we take a look down here on the second example, we have a quarter note to start us off. That's on beat 1, uses up all of beat 1. Our next note then finally gets to fall on beat 2. It only uses up the first half of beat 2, so our next one would be and. Now here's where it gets interesting. We have a tie between the and of 2 and 3. Because the total value is less than that of a half note, or less than 2 beats, we typically aren't going to write the next beat. So we wouldn't actually typically write our 3 in there. We wouldn't write another number until we got to the and of 3 over here, followed by beat 4. My recommendation when you get to these ties is at first ignore them. Just go through and kind of write in your beats, just quick just so you kind of get an idea and to make sure you're using up all your beats. Then it's just as easy to either mentally, if you're doing this in your head, or doing it on paper, to get rid of the 3, to make sure that you used up all of your beats. So if we were to do that here in the second measure, we'd have 1 and 2, 3, 4. But because this is tied, we don't actually need to write in the 2. So when we actually put our answer down, we'd have 1 and 3, 4. Make sense? In our last measure, we have a half rest. Because it's a rest, oh, by the way, this should be in parentheses. So should this. Because we have a rest, it should be in parentheses. And again, it is a half note or larger, so we'd write in both beats. So we'd have 1, 2 in our parentheses, followed by 3 and 4. That's the bulk of the test. The second half of your test should be, I hope, fairly simple for you. You're basically going to get some notes written out, and it'll ask you what the value of those notes are. So you'll see some half notes, some half rests, some eighth rests, and your job is simply going to be to write in what the beat value of those notes and rests is. If you have any questions, definitely feel free to ask me. Good luck.